You're listening to the UnSafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
He's going to make sure that those who need to be judged are judged. No one will be missed. There will be a search, diligent search, to make sure no one is missed. The image is one of God carefully searching every dark corner of the city to make sure that everyone who should be dealt with is dealt with. All sinners will be discovered. You can't hide. The idea of searching out those who try to escape, that's a theme in the prophets. You see that over and over again. You can't hide from Yahweh.
In the game of hide and seek, there's a seeker and then a ton of people who are hiding. The way the hiders win is if the seekers never find them. When I was younger, I remember having to get super creative to ensure I won as a hider. Most of the time, it still wasn't enough. Today, Pastor Ken says there's nowhere you can hide from the Lord on Judgment Day. He'll find everyone who's against Him. Therefore, you must be ready and have a relationship with Him so you can be in His presence for eternity. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Zephaniah chapter 1 as he continues his message, The Day of the Lord is Near.
The second quarter is the area northwest of the temple, and we saw that. It's between those 2 points. It's the newest part of Jerusalem at the time of the attack. They had just added some additions to Jerusalem. Manasseh did some of the building, and Josiah finished it. So this is what we're talking about. The army would progress, would enter via the fish gate at the north end of the Tyropoeon Valley. And that's where the army of the Babylonians would actually come in. And the sound of the crashing in the hills, that's the sound of the army as they approach. They can hear it because the sound is bouncing off the hills as they hear them come. The next location, which is the mortar, there's a small valley between the second quarter and the Temple Mount. And it was very popular for all the merchants to gather together. And it fits the context for this. The action moves from the northern gate to the second quarter, and now you're coming to the Temple Mount. But before you get to the Temple Mount, you come to this little area of merchants who have got money and goods and everything for sale. It's a thoroughfare on the way to the temple, and it makes sense to be a commercial site there. But why the comment about these being people of Canaan rather than being called citizens of Jerusalem? Well, it could be because these are folks who live in the shadow of the temple, but they no longer worship Yahweh and they want nothing to do with Him because they're busy worshiping their God, which is money, and they're selling stuff. So that could be part of it. We don't know. It could also be that they're all merchants and none of them are from Judah. They're all foreigners. That's possible too. Or at the end of the day, they're just merchants who are busy worshiping money and selling things. And then their God is money, and so they're called Canaanites. And I think that makes more sense when you start looking at the context of this verse. Merchants and those with money trusted in their riches, and now God is promising to cut down those who are involved in that kind of idolatry. The merchants, he says here, will be totally wiped out. And there's some interesting words that start getting used. The word here is nikaratu, using the base word karat, which is the same word that Daniel uses when he is told by Gabriel that Messiah will be cut off in Daniel 9:16. He will be karat, cut off. So you take a look at what that word means. The word means to exterminate, to cut off, to cut down. It's very clear. It's to kill, okay? So when they say they're going to be cut off, they're going to be gone. They're exterminated. And this is a promise from Yahweh to personally deal with those who, through less than honest financial activity, have actually taken advantage of His people. He's taking care of them. They're gone. They're going to be executed as the army, being pictured, moves from the fish gate to the Temple Mount. And that's what the Babylonians did. There are digs going on all throughout Jerusalem right now that they're down to the level of when the Babylonians did come in and take Jerusalem, and they're finding that the destruction is pretty severe, and they're finding that that kind of activity was actually going on. They'll be executed. Now, is there escape for anyone who is subjected to this? Because the judgment that's being talked about here by the Lord took place with the Babylonians, but there's another incident that's going to take place with the Romans, and then there's another that's yet to take place. It hasn't happened yet. In verse 12, we read this: "It'll come about at that time that I will search Jerusalem with lamps, and I will punish the people who are stagnant in spirit, who say in their hearts, the Lord will not do good nor harm. Their wealth will become plunder, and their houses desolate. Yes, they'll build houses, but not inhabit them, and plant vineyards, but not drink their wine." Okay, so the Lord now makes clear that when he's the one bringing the judgment on Judah, he is going to be thorough. He's going to make sure that those who need to be judged are judged. No one will be missed. There will be a search, diligent search, to make sure no one is missed. The image is one of God carefully searching every dark corner of the city to make sure that everyone who should be dealt with is dealt with. All sinners will be discovered. You can't hide. The idea of searching out those who try to escape, that's a theme in the prophets. You see that over and over again. You can't hide from Yahweh. We found that out. Jonah tried. It didn't work. It didn't work well for him. In Psalm 139, verse 11 and 12, we see this: "If I were to say, certainly the darkness will cover me, and the light will turn to night all around me, even the darkness is not too dark for you to see." He can see. "And the night is as bright as day. Darkness and light are the same to you." This is a thoroughness in judgment. And how thorough was it? We don't have a lot of written documentation from the Babylonian period, but we have a lot from the Roman period. When the Roman legions destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD, they were incredibly brutal. They killed most of the people in the city. They took a bunch of prisoners with them because they wanted to have a nice parade when they got back to Rome. They call it a triumph. And all those prisoners wound up becoming slaves, and they built the Colosseum. But then there were a bunch of those who were hiding in the sewers of Jerusalem. And through archaeological discoveries taking place now, we're finding those sewers, and we're finding what's left of those people and all the belongings they had. The Romans searched for them, as Josephus tells us, and he was an eyewitness. He said they made a search underground, and when they found where they were, they broke up the ground and slew all they met with. You couldn't get away. The Lord was being thorough in his judgment. And we're finding archaeological evidence of that today. If you want to see that, just go online to the City of David and look at some of the videos that they're now posting of the excavations that are taking place in the sewers where the Romans found people. This is going to be the case for the day of the Lord, too. Judgment is going to be thorough. No one will escape from the judgment that the Lord brings at the end of the age. Here in verse 12, the Lord makes also clear that those who are apostate, the word he uses is stagnant in spirit, okay? Those are folks who have turned away from the Lord. And God never says anything good about people who have turned away from the Lord, especially those who are apostate. Now, again, start thinking about those jumping over the threshold, those who are working in the temple, Levites. He's saying they're not going to escape. Apostasy in the Old Testament is always dealt with severely. Always. For us today, an apostate would be someone who at one time had all the outward appearances of being a believer, but they never were. And now they are busy doing whatever it is that they want to do. And you wonder, how could a Christian do that? Well, they never were Christians. You would call them apostate. The Bible talks about it being someone in that condition harder to win them back to the Lord than it would have been winning them the first time. This is a popular thing that there are groups of believers, well, they're not believers, churches are doing this. They call it progressive Christianity. And it leads to apostasy and a rejection of the faith. There's an excellent apologist, her name is Elisa Childers, and she's written at length on these folks. She actually had an encounter with it and made her do a little more research into the whole topic. But she talks about them saying that when she was involved with this group, it became clear that this group of people wanted to progress beyond the Christianity that they had known. In other words, what we teach here. They were going through what practically would become a rite of passage in this new movement, and they call it deconstruction. So if you've heard that term, they're actually taking people and trying to destroy their faith. That's what they're doing. In the context of faith, deconstruction is the process of systematically dissecting and rejecting the beliefs you grew up with. So they start asking questions about, and some of the questions are ones that you may have asked as a new believer. It's not a problem. There's nothing wrong with it. But now you got somebody whispering in your ear saying there is no God, there is no Jesus. I mean, that's all fiction, and that's what they're saying. Sometimes a Christian will deconstruct all the way into atheism, and that is now becoming a problem. Some remain there, but others experience a reconstruction. But the type of faith that they have never resembles Christianity anymore. Traditional understandings of the cross, the Bible, and the scriptures and gospel, it's just thrown away. So when you start seeing folks who are Christian singers or Christian artists or pastors or whatever, and you start doing some research and you find out that they've been involved in progressive Christianity, you understand that this is what's going on. They first of all may never have been believers, and now they absolutely are not. And all you can do is pray for them that the Lord would show them once again what it is that they've turned from and what they've rejected. But in other words, the people today who are busy mixing stuff together are no different than the people in Judah who were also mixing stuff together. They were mixing Yahweh worship and idols. So it's the same word, apostasy. Those who do not know the Lord assume they know what he is doing. I have heard that more from political leaders over the last couple of years, where they're saying, a Christian would never do that, or a Christian would never do that. And I'm going like, how do you know? Are you one? Have you ever been one? They think they know what he's doing, but they really don't. So you look again at the last half of verse 12. These are people who say in their hearts, the Lord will not do good nor harm. In other words, God won't judge us. God is not that kind of a God. He's going to leave us alone. There won't be a rapture of the church. That's not going to happen. The end times, forget it. That's not going to happen. We make our own future. That's the kind of stuff they would be saying today. In fact, there are a lot today in the church who deny the rapture of the church is going to happen at any second, but the Bible's really clear that it's going to. Those who think this honestly believe that the Lord won't do anything. I mean, stop and think. We currently have an area of the Northeast that is covered by smoke in a huge, huge fire taking place, not even in this country, to the point that people can't go outside. And you start wondering, well, why is that going on? Well, this part of the country did what in the last 2 years? They decided to make abortion incredibly legal, and they decided infanticide is okay too. And you wonder, does God still judge? Well, he's trying to get their attention. He's working hard to do that right now. The problem is anyone listening? California is going through the same thing, with all the snow and all the water and all the rain, and you start wondering, well, what's going on? Well, the Lord's trying to get their attention. He's never changed the way he operates. He never has. And they think that the Lord will not do good nor harm. People need to start looking around and see what's going on these days. What you got is people in Judah as well as people today who are not worried about answering this question. What does God want? They don't ask that question. The attitude's observable. There are those all around us today who say the Lord will do nothing. Peter warned, by the way, that this was going to be widespread at the end of the age. And I got to tell you, when I had somebody tell me that one time, that, oh no, the Lord won't do this and he won't do that, I just looked at him and said, thank you for proving my point. He said, what do you mean? We're in the last days, and you just proved it. Oh, he was not happy with me. But that's okay. 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 to 9 says, above all, understand this. In the last days, blatant scoffers will come, being propelled by their own evil urges, and saying, where is his promised return? I've heard that. Okay, I've heard that in churches. For ever since our ancestors have died, all things continued as they were from the beginning of creation. Geologists used to think that before Mount St. Helens. Now they're kind of changing their mind, because things happened as a result of the eruption of Mount St. Helens that they said it would normally take millions of years. It took 30 minutes. And now all of a sudden they have to rethink everything. They deliberately suppressed this fact that by the word of God, the heavens existed long ago, and an earth was formed out of water and by means of water. And through these things, the world existing at that time was destroyed when it was deluged with water. Just go see the Grand Canyon and you'll get the evidence of it. But by the same word, the present heavens and earth have been reserved for fire by being kept for the day of judgment and destruction of the ungodly. And we've already read about that in Zephaniah. Now, dear friends, do not let this one thing escape your notice, that a single day is like 1,000 years with the Lord, and 1,000 years are like a single day. The Lord's not slow concerning his promise, as some regard slowness, but is patient towards you because he does not wish for any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. We need to be about the business of reaching others for Jesus Christ. That's what he's telling us here. That's why he is delaying. That's why he wants to see a few more come in. Our goal should be, who's next, Lord? Give me one more. Give me one more, Lord. Have that be the right one. Have that one be the one that we're ready to go. But this verse wraps up apostasy and unbelief into the structure of the church in the last days. And we see it. We don't see it here at Calvary. It doesn't happen. But we do see it in other churches. Even in this area, we see it. Yeah, this is a picture of the Laodicean church, another one. And we know we're in the last days simply because those who say they're believers deny that Jesus is coming soon. In fact, I've actually heard people say that by me teaching it, that I'm actually teaching heresy. It's not heresy. It's biblical. Paul was looking for the rapture of the church to take place in his lifetime because he uses the word, we will all be changed, which means he expected it. But these people who are doing this, the apostates, they're not Spirit-led believers. They're not. Far from being led by the Spirit of God, they are governed by their own passions. Yes, there are mockers in the church. We need to understand that. It's not taunting of those outside the congregation. It's not unbelievers who are disinterested in the faith, but it comes from those inside the church who say they're followers of Christ, but they aren't. They're apostate. They deny that he's coming back. They deny basic aspects of the overall doctrine of Christ. And when they do this, they make an excuse for their own immoral conduct because they're saying, well, he's not coming back. They basically say, sow your wild oats now because the reaper will never return. That's kind of what was going on in Judah during Zephaniah's day. They were doing the same thing. So they're following their evil inclinations and their evil nature, which was going on in Judah again. It's amazing how common nothing ever changes. Solomon got it right. It's always the same. It can be seen with the shift of syncretism as the overall guiding worldview that we see today, even among those who say they're born again. And it leads to apostasy eventually. Once we become the determiner of our own conscience based on our feelings rather than objective truth, you've entered a rather slippery playing field. Now, heresy is one thing. That's just an aberration of doctrine, and usually you can teach somebody and help them to understand, or in some cases they'll stick with it and they'll have their own following. That's one thing. But apostasy is a total renunciation of Jesus Christ through word or deed. That's what it is. It may take the form of outright renunciation, and we're seeing that happen almost on a weekly basis now by folks who are public Christian figures, or they'll abandon a recognizable Christian lifestyle, and those we tend to call prodigals. I've got a couple of them in my family. They say that they were believers, and all of a sudden one day they turn around and they don't live like that anymore. And they seem to be able to live with impunity doing that. And you wonder, how can they do that? Well, maybe they were never believers to begin with. Don't know. The concept presupposes that the person who commits apostasy at one time appeared to be a believer. Okay, so that's the one thing we have to remember. It is the abandonment of true Christian faith. It is the Laodicean church all over again. Now, here in our country, to kind of get to that point, George Barna did a recent study at Arizona Christian University, And when asked to identify the nation's most appropriate determinant of right and wrong, a plurality of people that they interviewed, 42%, suggested that what you feel in your heart is the best guide, compared to the lower numbers that said we should base morality on majority rule. Okay, that's a bad idea. Or principles taught in the Bible. 29% say follow the Bible. Or stated differently, 7 out of 10 adults say that human beings rather than God should be the judge of right and wrong. And that's where we are today as a nation. And it reflects in what's going on in our nation. So to answer the question I asked earlier, what does God want? He wants you and he wants me. That's what he wants. He has gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure that you and I are afforded every opportunity to hear about Jesus Christ and what he did on the cross for us. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe is condemned already, because he's not believed in the name of the only Son of God. For the Jewish people, he simply wanted them to follow him. That's what the covenant was all about. God had their best interests at heart. Always did. Still does. Has our best interests at heart. Before I came to Christ, I thought I had my best interests at heart. I thought I knew what I wanted. And God said, you don't know very well because you've only got a few years of experience. I can tell you this is what you need to do. I thought he was going to turn me into a missionary in some dark field in Africa. He didn't. That's why I didn't come to Christ for years, because I didn't want to. Satan had done some strange things in my mind and was convincing me there were other things that I needed to worry about rather than the Lord. God has our best interests at heart. He knows what makes us tick. He knows what we are interested in and what we would be excited about. And we're all different. He has the desires for us just as he had the desires for Judah. He wants us to thrive in him. But of course, as we've already looked at, the people in Judah have progressed beyond that. They don't need God anymore. They did not know him like they used to, but they still acted like they did. Kind of what we see in some churches today, where Ichabod's written over the door. That means the spirit has departed, but there's nothing there. Except maybe a good cooking class, and that's about it. So for those who hold the view that the Lord is no longer in the business of judgment, the Lord has a message for them. It's in verse 13. Their wealth will become plunder and their houses desolate. And they're going to build houses but not inhabit them, and plant vineyards but not drink their wine. I find it interesting that as the Lord outlines the consequences to those who are comfortable with the things of the world, he specifically talks about those things that they would have accumulated and placed confidence in, saying that's what he's going to take away, is all those things that they had built up around them. Their wealth, plunder. Those nice homes they built, it's kind of tough to live in when you've been taken captive and drug 1,000 miles away to Babylon. Tough to live there. Functionally speaking, these are people who lived for themselves, and they made themselves the master of their own domain, and they could attempt to claim spiritual neutrality. Oh yeah, I'm a believer in Yahweh. I go to temple every so often, but you can't be neutral. It's not possible.
You've been listening to the latest edition of the UnSafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown. As Pastor Ken continues to go through these minor prophet books, there's a lesson and a message to be learned from each one. Zephaniah spoke boldly as a prophet during his time. Did you realize that he was a prophet during King Josiah's time? That means that he grew up during the years of evil and wicked rule of Manasseh and Amon. God used Zephaniah to speak to the people about God's coming judgment and to give hope for something restored at a later time. Zephaniah used the term, the day of the Lord, more than any other Old Testament book. This was a reference to the coming fall of Jerusalem to Babylon, and also the prediction of a greater judgment on the world as a whole in the future. These prophecy books are not something to take lightly, and they don't apply to things in the past. They're very much there for our instruction and for things that are still ahead. If you'd like to listen to this message again, you can find it at theunsafebible.com. In fact, if you want to listen to more teachings from this book or any of the other minor prophet books, just look for them on our website. This ministry comes to you from Hobe Sound, Florida, and we feel truly blessed to have had you with us today. We trust that you're growing in new and interesting ways each time you tune in. Stay tuned for the next message from Zephaniah, as Pastor Ken has much to share. We thank you for your support and your listening ear here on the UnSafe Bible.